Before I finally end this lesson, I'd like to include one more part to this lesson, and this part is called calling methods with parameters. It's going to help you to complete your assignment at the end of lesson 6. Now, in previous lessons or parts, I told you that methods are basically functions, but that's not totally true. They do have some differences or peculiarities in them. So when a function forms part of a class, we say that they are called methods. And for the most part, majority of the time, the methods behave the same way as functions, but there are some differences or peculiarities in the way methods are called from outside of the class. Yes, they do behave the same, but if methods form part of a class, the way they are called is different. So let's take an example. I'm developing a class here called arithmetic. It has 3 properties: num1, num2, and result of type integer. Then I'm creating an init method that's going to help me to, when objects are created of this class, it's going to help me to initialize the properties. So I have an init method that has 3 parameters: num1, num2, and result. And in the init method, it's going to initialize the properties based on what the input parameters are when the object is created. Now you'll notice that since I have 3 properties and the init method also takes 3 parameters, the maximum number, which is equal to 3, we say that this init method is called the designated initializer because it takes the maximum amount of parameters. It's called the designated initializer. But the issue with the designated initializer is I'll have to provide all 3 parameters when I create the object. Now what if I don't want to provide all 3 default values for the object? I could create a convenience initializer. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm creating a convenience initializer that's going to take no properties. I'm going to give it some defaults of all zeros. So within this init method, I'm calling the designated initializer and passing all zeros to it. Now this, since it's an arithmetic class, what this class does, it performs arithmetic functions. And arithmetic functions are like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. So I've put in 2 methods here. The first method takes in 2 parameters, num1 and num2. It then adds up the 2 numbers num1 and num2 and puts the answer in the property result, and it then returns a result to the object that called it. So this method, all it does is it takes 2 numbers, it adds it up, and it returns the result or the sum of the 2 numbers. Now you'll notice something odd here. I have the name of the parameter, which is num1. These are local variables. I've now inserted something before it called n1, and I've also inserted something before num2 called n2. These are called optional external parameters. These are called optional. So N1 and N2 are called optional external parameters. And I'll show you later on, once we create objects of this class, what is the purpose of these optional external parameters. But for now, don't worry too much about this. It's just an additional identifier for num1 and num2. This class also has another method called sub or subtraction. Here again, it takes in two input parameters, num1 and num2. It finds the difference between num1 and num2 and outputs that or returns that result. So addition and subtraction, those methods are identical except for the operation that I'm performing. Here I'm performing addition and here I'm performing subtraction. And another difference is I've inserted optional external parameters to that. Good, so now our class is complete. Let's create objects of this class. So I'm creating an object called calc1 of class arithmetic, and I want to initialize the properties with all zeros. Now, whenever you want to initialize the properties with your own values, or you don't want to use the default from the init methods, you have to explicitly give the name of the parameter. Num1, which is equal to 0, num2 equal to 0, and result equal to. So you're passing these parameters to the designated initializer. And you have to specifically pass the value to it and also specify the name of the input parameter. So this will call the designated initializer, which is up here, and zeros will be passed to it. Okay, and the properties will be set. So the default initializer has three parameters: num1, num2, and result. The point I'm making here is whenever you want to pass those values, you have to be explicit in naming the parameters here. Now, if I do not want to use the default initializer and I don't want to pass in the parameters, I want to use the convenience initializer. All I do is I make another object of this class and I pass nothing to it. So in this case, the convenience initializer with no input parameters will be called. This one will be called. And then within this method, I call the designated initializer and give it some default values. Now I want to, in calculator 1, I want to add two numbers. So I want to call this method called addition. And I want to add the number 4, and I want to add 4 to give me the answer of 8. Now when you call a normal function, when we dealt with functions in the previous lesson, you didn't need to specify the name of the input parameter. You just said addition 4, 4. But addition is now not a function, it is a method. It's part of a class. Well, it's part of this object called calc1. Here I have to specifically give it the name of the parameter. And why n1 and n2? Those were the names that I gave it up here. In addition, I put in these optional external parameters or additional names, but aliases for n1 and n2. So I could use those optional external parameters by by putting in the name of the optional external parameter, passing the value of 4, and n2 and passing the value of 4, where n1 equates to num1 and n2 equates to num2. Here I'm also calling the addition method, but from the second object called calc2, and I'm using the optional external parameter. If you typed in addition 4, 4, you'll get an error. You have to use these optional external parameters. Now, what if you did not have optional external parameters? You did not include that in your method, like up here, where I've got function, subtraction, sub, and I just got the input parameter num1 and num2. I did not put any optional external parameters here. How then will I call the method? This is how you call it. Okay. So I'm calling the method sub from calc1. In sub I did not put any optional parameters, external parameter. So how do I call it? This is how I call it. I do not use, for the first parameter, I do not mention what its parameter name is, which is num1. I only include the second one, num2, the parameter named num2. If there was a num3, num4, num5, you have to specify what the input parameter names are, but you do not, you must not specify the name of the first input parameter. Only the ones, the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Here again, I'm calling calc2's sub method. Here again, I'm not including the name of the first input parameter, but the second one, third one, fourth one, if it had one. I may ask, why is this so strange? Why can't I just put num1 here? Okay, and why can't I just put num1 here? Okay. Well, you'll notice that the screen is grayed out here. It means it's not computing. There's some sort of error. Okay, and now I'm getting the right answer, -1 and 27. It is now computing. It's not graying out here. The reason why I cannot put in the name of the the first input parameter is because Swift wants to maintain some sort of compatibility with Objective-C. Now, you know, before we had Swift, we used to program in Objective-C. And because Objective-C and Swift, Apple wants to play very nicely with both programming languages. I mean, you could include Objective-C while programming. You could have a mix of Objective-C and Swift. In order to maintain compatibility between Objective-C and Swift, Apple wants you not to put in the name of the first input parameter in here. Maybe after a few years, when we totally discard Objective-C and we only have Swift, then maybe then we would follow a regular convention of putting in the name of the first input parameter. But for now, please omit the name of the first input parameter whenever you're calling a method of this object or class. So that is finally lesson 6. When we get back, we'll come back to lesson number 7.